3, 2, 1. Okay, we are live and recording the first ever Rugby Codebreakers Christmas special. You can tell it's a Christmas special because I'm wearing a Christmas jumper, which you might just be able to make out given the awful lighting of the room I'm in.
Whereas I'm over here grinching my way through Christmas as usual.
Perfect. So, as always, he's Lawrence.
That's Martin.
We are the Rugby Codebreakers. Merry Christmas to all those who celebrate it, and have a really good time to all those who don't celebrate it.
Yes, and just to annoy everyone else, happy holidays.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Let's be as bland as possible. So, where to start, really? We've had a little bit of a break since our last episode, just over a couple of weeks, a little bit longer than usual. Well, that's because we were heading into the festive period, so just needed to make sure we time that right, because obviously we won't be recording one immediately like on New Year's Eve when we would normally be going for an episode just round about the 1st. So just spreading them out a little bit more for the next couple of episodes.
Yeah.
But I think this time of year, what I'm always thinking of is it's nearly Six Nations time. We're just a few weeks away from what is, for my money, leaving aside World Cups. World Cups are fantastic, but the Six Nations has a special place as probably the best tournament in international rugby for me. I think it's just the fact that you've got well over a century of absolutely bitterly fought rivalries that give it a special frisson.
Yeah, you've got centuries of history behind this competition. The World Cup's been going on a while, but not long enough to just have that sheer amount of niggle that you get from a Six Nations match.
Exactly. And the Six Nations, of course, as we know, contains various other trophies. You can win the Triple Crown. You can win the Calcutta Cup. As an England and Scotland fan here, that one has particular enjoyment for us. These little head-to-heads are great because, of course, what can happen is you can be having a rotten Six Nations. You can be out of the running for the championship halfway through, but you can still have a game or two to play for that makes the whole thing worthwhile.
I think it'd be really great if Italy could get the rivalry with France going, because I know that the France-Italy game, to the Italians at least, is like the England-Scotland game.
Yeah, definitely.
The French are the ones they want to beat.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And they have knocked them off a couple of times now. It's just needing to do it with that bit of consistency that makes it that takes it from a David and Goliath to a proper rivalry.
Yeah. They get some history going, they get some scores on their side of the account balance, and then it'll start getting towards the England-Scotland thing where they're actually really looking for the win, and hopefully it won't just be a case of like the Scots sometimes get. The whole season can be a big ball of hot garbage, but as long as they beat the English, it's a successful season.
Yeah, I think sometimes that attitude, not just for Scotland, England, but for lots of things, sometimes it can seem like a bit of a sort of what you'd call small club mentality in a club game. But on the other hand, it is a good thing in the Six Nations because it means we don't tend to get many what you'd call dead rubbers. The matches generally all have something on them, even, no matter where it is. And if France and Italy get to the same stage, the other thing is, of course, it's big for neutrals.
Mm.
You can watch England, Scotland without being English or Scottish, without having a dog in the fight, so to speak, just because you know what is on the line there. And to be fair, let's face it, for England in the Six Nations, basically everybody's aiming up as well because everybody hates the English. So
yeah,
it's like, yeah, maybe Scotland are first to hate them, but the Irish and the Welsh and the French all absolutely want to normalise England as well.
It's kind of ironic that the English wear white. when there's so obviously the Black Hats.
Yeah, absolutely. But we head into this Six Nations with two extra special reasons to be excited. One, it's World Cup year. So this is, of course, a really huge gauge of what everybody's form is like before the World Cup. And two, we've got new coaches. We have the return of the Messiah in Wales, Warren Gatland, and we have now Steve Borthwick taking over from Eddie Jones for England. And that just makes it all again a wee bit more interesting. For Steve Borthwick, he's literally been pitched in with what 6-7 weeks or something to take over.
In a way, he's got a free swing at the World Cup. If it goes badly wrong, he can say it's not my team yet.
True.
I'm still moulding this. But if it goes well, Eddie Jones will look good. He'll look good. They'll be able to say he took us the extra step that Eddie Jones wasn't able to give us.
Yeah.
So in a way, yeah, free hit for Steve Borthwick. Insofar as you ever can with England, because the expectation with England is huge as ever.
It is. Yeah, it really is. One thing that I found interesting was one of the Australian players who played under Eddie Jones. I can't remember. Matt Gito was saying why he thought the RFU were mad to get rid of Eddie Jones. He said he's succeeded every time he's been at the World Cup. And someone else pointed out he didn't succeed with England. He got to the final, but for England, surely success has to be winning the thing. They're too big a nation for nearly winning it to be regarded as success. And I thought that's a fair point, actually.
Final is the bare minimum that England will expect. The All Blacks will expect to get to the final, and England will expect to get to the final, and only one of those actually can justify that, I think. The England as a nation of its size, in the same way that they have the expectation that we're going to win the World Cup in football, in rugby they get very much the same sort of expectation level is set going. So anything less than a win becomes a failure.
Yeah. But of course, heading into this Six Nations and this World Cup, you'd have to say of the home nations, it's Ireland who are the ones who probably have the most to be excited about. They're the ones who come in as world ranked number one. They've just had their victories over South Africa. They're on a long unbeaten run. They've got the continuity because they're going in with Andy Farrell as coach on a great run. And you think, really, Ireland have to be looking at winning the World Cup in 2023. That's good. I think they have gone from a country where they would be saying semi-finals will be a really good outcome, and if we can get there, then who knows what. To saying actually no, we've got to look beyond being semi-finals is really good, and we should be winning it because we are beating everybody regularly.
Yeah, they just had their first win against New Zealand in New Zealand.
Exactly, doesn't really get bigger than that.
Had the huge win against New Zealand at Soldier Field a few years back as well, which really broke the dam for them, I think.
Yeah. So I would say they are going into this Six Nations. They're the team to beat.
This has got to be one of the most important Six Nations tournaments that we've had, because getting momentum in this tournament is such a boon for the World Cup. If you trip and have a bad Six Nations, it's going to be so much harder to get into the World Cup without kind of just coming to a flying stop. So especially important for Ireland and for France. England, as I say, they've got a bit of a free hit. If Scotland can go into the World Cup with some momentum, they should be, I think, semi-finalists. Is their semi-finals is their win at that point?
Yeah, I think so. And I think they showed enough in the autumn internationals to say, as we always say with Scotland, the ability is there. Can they put the consistency together?
And what we want is them to have the ability to beat anyone on their day, not just scare anyone on their day.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Take the 50, 60 minute performance, make it an 80-minute performance, and make that happen regularly. Because they've got some real stars in the team.
I think they've got the confidence that they can beat the likes of Australia. They can beat the likes of Argentina. I don't think they've got the belief yet that they can beat a New Zealand or a South Africa.
Sure, yeah, that is a step up at the moment, and but then if you get to the knockout stages of a tournament, then you've got to think it is just 80 minutes. Though it's hard to get past the mentality. I'm reminded of I was reading about Pele in the 1970 Football World Cup, and a guy, I can't even remember the name of the man, but he was given the task of marking Pele, I think in the semi-final. And he said, I told myself, he's just a man like me. He's just flesh and blood. I was wrong. I think that there is that mentality as well. If you're going up against the All Blacks, for example, you're sort of saying to yourself, well, it's just 15 guys, same as us. But there's part of you that's thinking, but it's not just 15 guys, is it? It's the All Blacks.
Yeah. I wonder, has the power of something like the haka as a psychological tool for them being diluted by the arrival of teams like Samoa and Tonga who have their own hakas before the game?
Yeah,
It's something that you
maybe.
see more often now.
Yes, it could be. I always wonder, does that? It obviously fires up the team doing it, but does it sometimes backfire and fire up the opposition uh, too much? I don't know. It's a great spectacle anyway. We all love to see it. Uh, um,
My favourite haka, I think, was actually done by Munster.
really?
Yeah, the All Blacks playing Munster in a tour game. They did their haka first, and then the 5 New Zealanders that were in the Munster side came forward and did their own haka back at them. It was absolutely fantastic.
That's brilliant. I love it. Yeah, great stuff. Tell you one thing, back on Six Nations, interestingly from England, Steve Borthwick, in his first press conference and with Bill Sweeney from the RFU, the language has completely shifted from the Eddie Jones era. The Eddie Jones era was always about World Cups. Everything was part of the World Cup cycle and it was building towards the World Cup. Steve Borthwick is being really clear. He wants to win the Six Nations for the Six Nations.
Not
He
as a
wants to,
stepping stone.
exactly. He doesn't even want to be looking at the second game of the Six Nations yet. He wants to be saying these are all big games in their own right. They're not just a means to an end. We go in to win these games.
Well, I suppose the
Which again,
champion mentality is that you want to win. You want to win every game you play, and you want to win every competition you're in.
yes, true. But again, it puts a little bit more spice on this Six Nations because, as you say, in a way, Steve Borthwick has a free hit, but he's already talking himself out of that free hit by putting all the pressure on it by saying, "No, this is what we're about. This is not just a test run for the World Cup. We want to be winning this tournament." And that's what England fans want as well. It's I think sometimes a coach like Eddie Jones, who, let's face it, is a really good coach. But it can rankle with fans sometimes if you get the impression that a tournament that means a lot to you is not being taken as seriously by the coach because he sees it as preparation for something else more than.
In a way, it's not an issue that the likes of Warren Gatland and Wales have had, because for the Welsh, winning in the Six Nations has always been a priority, as much, if
Yes.
not more so, than the World Cup. Because I think, for one thing, the Welsh see the Six Nations as a competition they can win, whereas the stars really have to align for them to win the World Cup.
Yeah, I think they've had again, and it'll be interesting to see with them, won't it? Heading into this Six Nations, they will be looking at saying we can revitalise ourselves and win the Six Nations. But will they yet have the belief to think that this is a team that can go for the World Cup? Not after the year they've just had.
And how long before they realise that the coach isn't necessarily a cure-all, and that the part of the problem potentially that Wayne Pivac had with the Welsh side is that they're getting old and they haven't got the youngsters coming through.
Yeah.
So can Warren Gatland make the proverbial silk purse out of the sow's ear? And how long does he get before people start grumbling?
Yes, that's the thing, isn't it? I think it's a brave decision of him to come back because he's got nothing to prove as Wales coach. He's been there, he's done it. And I always think, going back where you've been tremendously successful is actually a big risk. You can take your own legacy.
There's a lot of sentimentality in his return to Wales. He's seen them doing badly, and I think he has a love for Welsh rugby. That means he wants to see them do well. And and for that reason, I think he's maybe gone with his heart rather than his head in going back to Wales.
And I suppose there's a possibility you can say that the fans maybe will give him a little bit more indulgence than they would anyone else because of all he's achieved in the past. If he has a rough couple of opening matches in the Six Nations, but he's saying, look, it's not an overnight fix. I've got a plan and we will get there. People might believe that more from him than they would from a newcomer.
Because the other question with Welsh rugby is, if it hadn't been Gatland, who would they have got? I don't see any fresh young Welsh coaches. I'm not sure who they would have gone for to head up the national team there if it wasn't Gatland.
No, absolutely. Eddie Jones could have been available. That would have been interesting.
Quick trip down the M4.
Yeah. After the, shall we say, somewhat offensive things he said about Wales while he was England coach as well, that'd be quite amusing. I won't say exactly what it was because it did involve four-letter words, but he said it was a little country that rhymed with pit, I believe.
Yeah.
So that could have been interesting. But hey, he's got a proven track record.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, we were speculating on what the future might hold for Eddie Jones in our last episode. He's made it very clear what he wants the future to hold for him is another international job. He's not looking to go into club coaching anywhere at the moment. He wants to take on a country. And I suppose he'll be looking for someone he can coach in the 2023 World Cup. But who that country would be, I don't know.
I'm not sure that it'd be in time for the World Cup, but I'm fairly sure the Japanese would have him back.
Yes, that's true. That went very well. So yes, I'm sure they would be happy with that. It might be that one of the sort of minnow type nations thinks here's an opportunity to bring in someone with a lot of experience.
Best fit I can think of for Eddie Jones, and it's a bit of a swing. USA.
Oh yeah. I could
Put
see
him
that.
in charge of rugby in America from the mooted Major League Rugby and the national side, and get him to put America on the map in the same way that he did for Japan.
Yeah, I think they'd like his style over in the States as well. They'd like his no frills, confrontational attitude. Let's face it, he's not shy about a quote. He speaks his mind. He likes to play head games with the opposition occasionally, and that makes for good copy. I think that would play well in the States.
Yeah. So, USRFU, if you're listening or watching, which you very probably aren't, away you go.
But you should
Make
be.
the call.
Yeah, you absolutely should be listening and watching. I'm sure they are really. Why would they not be? But
If we say the name 3 times, do they appear?
Yeah. Another thing, of course, in the England setup, we have Kevin Sinfield brought in by Steve Borthwick as his defence coach. They've been together already, working together at Leicester. Clive Woodward said that Kevin Sinfield was the absolutely the only viable choice for a defence coach for England, in his opinion. Clive Woodward does like to make comments on the England team now that he's from the safety of, I won the World Cup and I'm not involved anymore, so I can say what I like. As an England fan, you know, my enthusiasm for Sir Clive is undimmed, but I do think sometimes that people inside the setup must be thinking, you're not helping, Clive.
Yeah. So having said that, of course, he's saying with England taking the Leicester head coach and the Leicester defensive coach, Leicester not top of the league.
Mm.
Yeah, then so you're not exactly taking the best coach from the best club sides there, but they're maybe the most eligible, I guess. It's the most English.
I think Steve Borthwick did also. He worked with Eddie Jones earlier in Eddie Jones's run as England coach, so there is a bit of continuity there as well. Maybe they're thinking Steve can come in, has a good enough relationship with the players that that it's not necessarily tearing everything up and starting from scratch in a World Cup year, but it'll be a new enough appointment to change things up a bit. One thing I was finding very interesting is thinking that Kevin Sinfield as a defence coach, because Kevin Sinfield had a long and illustrious rugby league playing career, and then played a little bit of rugby union right at the end for Leeds Carnegie. But he was known, he played standoff half or loose forward, usually. And he was very much a playmaker. He had a great tactical kicking game. He was extremely consistent. He had good leadership skills, a good passer of the ball, and his job was to open up defences. And it struck me, we've seen a lot of rugby league players come into rugby union acting as defensive coaches, and the most successful of them, for my money, Mike Ford, Sean Edwards, Andy Farrell, all of these guys were known in their playing days for their attacking prowess. They were the guys who unpicked the defence. And I just find it's on a very sort of literal, plain reading, you'd expect that the best defensive coaches would be the hardest hitting defensive players. But clearly that is an simplistic way of reading the situation, I think, because that's not what's happening.
Yeah, well, I suppose you were saying previously that maybe as halfbacks they're used to trying to unpick the defence, so they know what a good defence looks like when they see it.
Yeah, I think that could be it. And of course, all those guys had in common as well was they were all captains, and illustrious captains at that. So that sort of leadership quality was there from their earliest playing days, really.
Natural organisers.
Yeah, I mean, Andy Farrell was Great Britain captain by the time he was 21 in rugby league. He was a leader from his earliest days. So I suppose to an extent it was inevitable that he'd end up being a successful coach. But it is an interesting thing, especially because I think when rugby union first went professional in 1996, I think we did see within a few years, we saw almost a quantum leap forward in rugby union in the way, because suddenly the players were able to be full-time athletes. The game just became, as it should have done, more professional and more brutal. And a lot of that did involve bringing in some minds from rugby league to look at different ways of doing things. I find it interesting that they're still doing that 26 years later. That it also raises questions about rugby league, doesn't it? It's like why wasn't someone thinking Kevin Sinfield's the man for us as a coach in rugby league? Why do these guys have to go to the other coach to find jobs?
I don't think it's just a case of the money's in the union and they're following the money. Is it? I mean, how many of the Wigan greats are now in the coaching staff there?
Well, so Sean Wayne is now director of rugby. He played in. He was in that sort of golden age of Wigan. He was in the team that won the World Club Challenge in '87, and and so on. But I suppose, yeah, if you look at all those sort of the players of that era for Wigan, Andy Gregory, Sean Edwards, Andy Farrell, all these people, some of them have gone into coaching, but virtually none of them have done it at Wigan.
The likes of Gary Connolly, Chris Redlinski, sorry, there's both talent and knowledge there that can be used.
Chris Redlinski, of course, is chief executive at Wigan, so he has gone stayed with the club, but not on the coaching side. But yeah, lots and lots of players who were in that successful team. Maybe they're just not interested in coaching, and that's fair enough. And there are only limited jobs, but it is interesting. You think some rugby league fans talk about a sort of brain drain. And I think there is a feeling among rugby league fans in this country that maybe there's a bit too much of a love affair with Australia, and we're not nurturing our own coaching talent, and therefore we lose some of the best of them. Because I think we've seen a lot of Australian coaches, like John Money, for example, at Wigan back in that golden age, come over relatively unheralded, but bringing the best methods from Australia, being really successful over here. And I think a lot of the clubs over here now are always looking for who's that next cutting edge Australian we can bring in, and maybe missing out on some of their own talent.
I think if I was a rugby league player of sufficient quality and I wanted to develop my game, I would want to go and play in Australia. And then if I wanted to go into coaching, I'd want to go and coach in Australia and get basically learn their methods over there, and then maybe bring that back to England as an Englishman.
Yeah, we could see that happen. Of course, Lee Breers, who was such a great player for Warrington for so many years, and because people might remember, perhaps most of all, for his outstanding performance for Wales against Australia in the 2000 World Cup, where for 50 minutes he tormented the Australians enough that people almost thought that an upset might happen in the semi-final. He coached at Wigan last season, and now he's gone to Australia. He got a job with the Brisbane Broncos, and there's a young British rugby league coach going to Australia and doing just as you said, and saying very much the same things, that the opportunity came up and he has to test himself down there as a coach, see what he can learn. Also, now Brian McDermott, Leeds Rhinos' most successful coach of all time, he's gone down to Australia as well. He's got a job in the coaching setup at Newcastle Knights. So it's interesting because Australia haven't really shown much interest in English coaches before.
Is there a danger that the Australians, being the best in the world, will figure that the English don't have anything to teach them? They won't have respect for the coaches or players.
That might well have been the attitude for a long time, I think, and now maybe the fact that we can see those two appointments within just a few months of each other, perhaps things are changing, and they're thinking, you know what? There's no doubt that they have the premier competition. The National Rugby League in Australia is far and away the best rugby league competition on the planet, and is, no disrespect to the English Super League, which I watch all the time and love, but it's a quantum leap ahead. But that doesn't mean that you can't bring in good ideas from outside. So we shall see. But I'm hoping that Lee Breers and Brian McDermott will be successful down there, and as you say, maybe then return to the game up here and bring some ideas with them.
Oh, keep me posted on how they do down there.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's really mostly a look at the Six Nations, which, as we said, we are really looking forward to. Another person who was very successful back in the day in the Five and Six Nations was the French coach Bernard Laporte. And until very recently, deputy at World Rugby. And I don't want to say too much here because, the ongoing legal case, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But that's going to be one of the most shocking stories in rugby this year. The fact that
He's been he stepped away from his post due to allegations of corruption, which may take as much as 2 years to be either proven or disproven.
Yeah.
But already, people cutting ties.
Yeah, we're talking about, as I say, a very successful coach of the French national team. Pretty sure he was a Grand Slam winner in back in the day as coach at least once. A minister of sport in the French government, and now, as I said, one of the 2 or 3 most powerful men in world rugby. Yeah, it really is shocking. And as you say, it's one where we're not going to know all the details, and for a long time, and don't want to. Innocent until proven guilty and all that. I don't want to prejudge what's going on too much, but
it appears to revolve around contracts for stadium building with the World Cup in France, and I'm assuming it's going to be allegations of kickbacks from construction companies.
And it's not what the French want as they head into a World Cup year. What should be a celebration for them hosting the World Cup. One of their most famous sons being at the heart of something murky like that is the last thing they would have wanted. As I say, we can't say too much really because we don't know that much. It's
definitely something we'll stay across as it develops more, I guess. But
yeah,
at the moment we're just it's
and absolutely.
Yet strangely underreported as well.
Yeah, and I think it's probably a lot of the media are in the same position. They don't want to commit to saying too much until they know more of what's going on. And I don't know about you, but I always thought, as French coaches go, I always liked Bernard Laporte. So, it's kind of like one of those where you think, I don't want any of that to be true. He always seemed like a good guy, and a likable guy. And I've got to say, for an English fan like me, the French coach is on a hiding to nothing trying to be a likable guy.
Yeah.
So the fact that he did it is quite impressive.
Definitely. But yeah, we shall indeed see. Speaking of strange things coming out of France, Finn Russell heading to Bath following the World Cup.
Yes, indeed.
Could be just the fillip that they need to try and restore the glory days.
I mean, we were just talking, weren't we, about how Bath were in the doldrums and struggling, Russell is a heck of a player. The autumn internationals really did him no harm whatsoever. They absolutely underlined graphically how important he is to the Scotland side and what a difference he makes. Big signing.
Although Bath have had some big names signings and some England internationals, internationals from all around the place, they haven't had a top-notch fly half for at least a decade, I'd have said. And whilst it pains me to hear someone talking about taking Bath back up to where they belong, it is the sort of signing that is just the sort of thing they will need to get there. And it may also persuade other big name stars to stay at the club where they might have left before.
Yeah, definitely. It's a statement of intent, isn't it, from the club to land a signature like his. And as you say, it sends a signal from him that he's at that age, and 32, at that level where he will. Sorry,
I think it's 32. He is now.
Yeah, he wants to be winning trophies.
Yeah,
right now. He's not going to go into somewhere for a long rebuilding job, which gets him to be 35, 36, and someone else reaps the benefits. If he's going there, it's because he thinks he can achieve something. Because let's say he's at that age where he's probably at the peak of his powers, but he's not going to be at the peak for that much longer. This year for him, World Cup year, Six Nations, World Cup, and then then a move to Bath. He'll be expecting big things in all of them because he knows he won't get many more chances.
More news from the English club game as well. They are still trying to resuscitate the cadaver that is Worcester Warriors.
Yes, they've gone well past life support, as you say, and at this point, they're looking. They really need the help of Victor Frankenstein, but
Does
it
kind of
would be
make you wonder
great
what
if
would happen if they do manage to resuscitate and all the players are now signed elsewhere.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That's always really tricky, isn't it? I mean, obviously, for the fans and everything, you want no one wants to see clubs go to a wall. It's um, it's just there's no upside to that for anybody. Um, so yeah, hopefully something can be done for Worcester. But as you say, there comes a point when all the players have signed elsewhere. It's like, yeah, what relation does the new entity have to the old one?
And then there's a scramble to sign players to fill the roster, and you're signing bad players over the odds,
Yeah, yeah,
and you're
because
right back where you started. Then
most
in
people have
financial,
already signed for the next season. There is you have to take what's available.
so this is, I think, potentially a time when they should actually just look at the clock and call it.
Yeah, could well be. But yeah, I mean, I wish them all the best. But as you say, it's a tricky situation.
They were always a club I had a bit of a soft spot for.
Yeah, yeah. Reminds me a bit of when Toronto Wolfpack were going under in rugby league a couple of years ago, largely brought about by COVID. But and you saw all these players signing elsewhere, and then noises about could you get Toronto back together, and you think, well, if you do, you can start. It's going to have to start from scratch because they've all gone. Um, so, and in that case, it was a situation where the ultimate sort of decision was no, it's too late. You know, Toronto Rugby League will continue, will be able to continue, but it'll have to continue in a North American competition. And perhaps that was the route it always should have taken in the first place. But there we go. That's another story. But yeah, all in all, lots of excitement to come. And I also saw the England's Roses returning after the heartbreaking disappointment of just missing out on that World Cup in New Zealand. But it's not doing them any harm at all in terms of the development of their game. I was reading today in their first Women's Six Nations game coming up, which is really the first sort of big standalone women's match that we'll see in the new year. They've already sold 25,000 tickets. It's fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a crowd that won't necessarily need donutting around the place when they get on camera.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially since they've got weeks and weeks left yet to sell tickets. So, you think, what could they get up to? 30, 40, 45? Who knows?
And that's a small Premiership ground right there, rather than it's not a full Twickenham, but it's a full Premiership ground.
Yeah, definitely. Makes you wonder what could have happened if they'd actually won that World Cup. But it's fantastic. It's great stuff.
Yeah.
And good to see. Yeah, good to see them keep moving in the right direction and building on their momentum. So, yeah, we'd love to see that. So, moving from that, I think I was talking in our last episode about having a look at the history of rugby and how it all came to be, because I get asked by a lot of people about this subject. The questions usually are along the lines of, why did rugby union and rugby league split? What's the root of that? One of the questions that people often ask me is, what is the original rugby? Which doesn't really actually make sense when you look at it. You can say, which is the original governing body of rugby in England? And you say, the Rugby Football Union. Absolutely. But what you've got is not an original game and an offshoot. What you've got is a game of rugby football that's split into two games. So they're both the original and neither are the original. Both have teams that go right back to the beginning. It's literally just a fork in the road.
And on an evolutionary basis, you can take that fork back further
Exactly.
Into pre-association football.
Indeed. And I think one of the things that we're not going to go too far along this road in this episode. I think we're just going to look at this for a few minutes in each episode. Really, I want to go back to sort of the earliest times of football in Britain, and what we're looking at really there is the medieval period.
Whole villages.
You and I, of course, yeah, we have both studied medieval history. It's another passion of ours beyond rugby. And one of the things that you notice about football is we can go back to Henry IV, King of England, 1399 to 1414, during the 100 Years' War. And he, on multiple times, issued edicts forbidding the playing of football. So that shows, one, that it was really established already. It was a big deal. He wanted his subjects to be practicing useful pursuits such as archery. That's what and football was regarded as already at that point a sort of a threat to civil order, if you like. Football already brought with it a certain amount of mayhem, drinking, and violence. But what we had
as well, I can think of stories of King Charles I nudging a small boy off the spire of Salisbury Cathedral whilst watching a football game happening in the close below.
Yeah, that's quite dramatic, isn't it? It's a long way down from there.
Yeah.
But what we had was games that were played in villages and towns up and down the country, often by one town against their nearest rivals. All of these games had their own rules, or lack thereof. What most of them had in common was that they were about getting a ball from one place to another. And you did that by kicking it or by propelling it with your hands, or a combination of the two.
And they normally devolved into huge scrums of people pushing, shoving, and kicking at something they couldn't quite see.
Indeed, absolutely. And some of these games would be played over a few miles, literally from one town to the other. And this went on for centuries. And what happens is, of course, when we get into the 18th century and then the 19th century, we have first canals and then the railway, drastically cutting the distance between places in real terms in this country. A lot more travel, a lot more transport, and we have cities growing and looking for civic pride. And alongside that, we have the Victorian mania for organisation. And what they did was start saying, we don't need to just play our local rivals. Let's be the best team in the county. Let's be the best county in the country. But to do that, you need to have some sort of agreed rules. You need to meet on an even playing field. And what happened was these people started getting together and hammering out rules that ultimately would become association football and rugby football in this country, because there were a couple of sticking points which they couldn't quite get past in terms of trying to make a unified game. And it's not, as most people would think today, so much about the handling of the ball. That was part of it, but it was also about what they called hacking. And hacking was very simply the practice of kicking your opponent in the shins to force him to drop the ball. And in that initial split between association football and rugby football kept hacking, association football did not. That was one of the big sticking points. But oddly enough, rugby football dropped hacking themselves within a relatively short time thereafter. because it's just so patently unsafe. You know,
They just went with
the reason
full body tackling instead.
Yes, exactly. But the reason I thought that was a good place to start is because people often say to find it funny that rugby uses the words rugby football. It's in both governing bodies here, the Rugby Football Union, the Rugby Football League, and most of the other football unions and leagues around the world. And people, I know people say to me, why do they call it football? It's not football. Football is football because you kick the ball. And you think, that was never as hard and fast a distinction as people might think it was, looking back at it today. All those games that football arose out of, lots of them involved handling the ball. Lots of them did not.
Gaelic
But
football, Australian rules football, even American football all involve a certain amount of handling and kicking of the football.
Exactly. They all have the same shared root. And the other interesting thing, of course, is that lots of other countries were doing the same thing over those centuries. They were kicking and throwing balls around everywhere. People often point to China as another example where it happened. And the reason is because it's simple and obvious. Human beings quickly figured out that a spherical or roughly spherical shape was a good shape for something to play with. It's
Then,
not,
as you say, the Victorian mania for organisation coupled with the global empire.
Exactly. That's why that sport, that we talk about the sports that Britain gave to the world. The reason that so many happened is because the Victorians were organising them, getting them into codified rules, and simultaneously had that transport network to disseminate them across vast amounts of countries all at once. It's not that nobody else was playing these games. It's not literally that somebody in 1837 said, let's play football. This is how it works. It's somebody said, let's turn football into a universal game that we can all play with each other.
Yeah, and on the note as well, with the spread through the empire, I was reading an article the other day which suggested that I think it's the second or third oldest football club in the world is based in India.
Really?
Yeah. Founded by East India Company soldiers or employees who were continuing to play the game when they were out in India.
Yeah, amazing. And I think perhaps in modern times today, because we have air travel and everything, people I find often underestimate how inventive our ancestors were and how persistent they were. I notice a lot of people often assume that things were invented more recently than they actually were invented, and perhaps don't realise just how much international travel went on in the 19th century and even the 18th century. It was a time of rapid change, and sport got caught up in that rapid change, and as we say, through the British Empire, was disseminated to lots and lots of different places, and quickly picked up. Anyway, we'll look at more at that in part 2 of History of Rugby. We'll actually get into the nitty-gritty of how rugby football separated from association football and became a proper separate entity with defined rules of its own.
Yeah, because if we start talking about history, we'll be here for hours.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, weeks possibly. And from there we'll follow on in future episodes through to the Great Split and the real bad feeling between the two codes for a long time, and the ins and outs of why that was, and then of course Open Rugby Union all the way up to where we are today. But it is a fascinating story, and like a lot of social history, it's bound up in the British class system. There's a lot going on, but as I say, we don't want to go over all that. We could just spend a 5-hour episode talking about nothing other than that. We'll just do a few minutes at a time in each show.
For the sanity of our viewers.
Indeed. But if you want a key takeaway at the moment, key takeaway is when it comes to what is the original rugby, there isn't an original rugby. There was a game called rugby football, and we'll find out how it evolved next time. So, after the dryness of history, it's time to get a little bit of excitement with a classic try.
What have you got for me this week, Uncle Martin?
This time, I'm just going to share my screen as always, and we are going to have a quick look at Jonathan Davies in his heyday of rugby league. This is against Australia, 1994. Great Britain haven't won a test against Australia since 1988 at this point. Here we go. Look at the dummy.
Hook, line, sinker, copy of Angling Times. I think the other thing that people forget about Jonathan Davies is that he had a turn of pace on him.
Yeah, exactly. He could go. He really could. It's just that little dummy, isn't it? Just enough to wrong foot the defender, and then boom, he's gone. And the Australian fullback almost gets to him.
Yeah.
Here we go. There you go. Just that little dummy past Bradley Clyde.
Show and go. Doing well to get round him on the outside there.
Yeah.
He was never a fire quick, but he was off here quick, but he was quick enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gotta love a bit of Jonathan Davies.
Absolute belter.
Yeah. They had another Jonathan Davies playing for Wales recently. That really confused me. I think he was probably still good enough to pull on the red shirt, even at that time.
Yeah. Great Britain went on to win that match. I'll just stop sharing for the moment before we look at the at our candidate for tackle for the big hit from the jukebox of this week. But as I say, Britain had been struggling against Australia for some time, and particularly interesting there, they won that match. It was only 8 points to 4, so that was the only try for Great Britain. That was what broke the deadlock. But Sean Edwards, another name constantly coming up today, was very, very grateful indeed to Jonathan Davies for that try, because he got red carded earlier in that match. He absolutely attempted to take Bradley Clyde, the Australian loose forward's head off. Straight red, you're gone. And he was thinking, I've blown another test series.
This is what I'm going to get remembered for.
Yeah, but instead, Great Britain fought a valiant action. Jonathan Davies put that little bit of magic in, got the try, got the win, and the series was leveled, although Australia did go on to win the series. But, you know, still got the test match victory on the day. So Jonathan Davies very much saving Sean Edwards' blushes that day. So now we go to the jukebox for another big hit. This isn't exactly a big hit, but it is probably the funniest tackle you'll ever see from the Middlesex Sevens in 1991. Here goes Will Carling in his pond.
Oh.
Literally, all he had left to do was ground the ball.
Oh.
He'd done everything.
That's always funny.
And Yeah, and the guy literally just picks him up, bodily lifts him off the floor and over the touchline.
One of my favourite memories of an England-France game was when the French managed to alienate the crowd within 5 minutes of the game starting, because they blitzed through the England line. The French player was free and clear, running over the line. All he had to do at that point was touch it down, and he knocked the ball out of his own hand with his thigh as he was running. Knock on,
Oh,
scrum 5, and the
oh,
French crowd just went, "Oh no, it's going to be one of those games." And sure enough, England walloped them.
oh dear, oh dear. I can't complain. I can't find it in my heart to be too upset about that. But you do feel for players in that situation. But I think in that one, Carling had done everything right. He'd absolutely burned the opposition down that right flank. Again, don't necessarily remember just how quick Will Carling was in his youth like that. That's 1991, and he was moving down that touchline.
Normally think of
But he
Carling
just
as a
got
crash ball runner.
exactly. But he got cocky. He got in the. He was all he had to do was ground the ball. He's not even looking. He's thinking, I've just scored a classic try at the Middlesex Sevens. Doesn't even see the defender coming in, who lifts him off his feet and carries him out of the pitch.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I always love these lessons in perseverance as well.
Yeah. Just drop on the floor when you're over the try line is the motto. No need for elaborate dives.
Yeah. So I always
Anything
wanted
like
to see
that.
Chris
Just
Ashton drop the ball when he was doing his swan dive finish.
yeah, you'd think it was bound to happen at some point, but he did seem to get away with it. But yeah, just get that ball on the floor before anything, then you can celebrate.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's been fantastic as always.
Yeah, always a
As I say,
pleasure.
we'll be back in the new year when we'll be even closer to what we say really promises to be one of the most exciting Six Nations in some time. Everybody's going in there with something to prove. Everyone's going in there with a reason for hope. You know,
A
it's
little
a
bit
new dawn
more
for England.
discussion. A little
Yeah,
bit more discussion, and I think we ought to pin ourselves to some predictions.
definitely. We'll nail our colours to the mast in our next episode, I think, so that we can be thoroughly ridiculed over the weeks that follow.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, brilliant. So, as we said before, Merry Christmas to those of you who appreciate that. Happy holidays to
Happy
anybody
New
who
Year
puts
as
up
well.
with that. Yeah, Happy
Yeah.
New Year to everybody. 2022 is more or less gone, guys. We survived it. Well
Yay.
done. All the best. See you next
Take
time.
care.